Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Chasing a Murder. Today, we're going to talk about the Chad Daybell case. This is also attached to Lori Vallow. They are referred to as the Doomsday couple. In fact, Chad Daybell's trial is ongoing as we speak. Right now, Chad Daybell is on trial while he's accused of taking the lives of a young JJ Vallow, Tylee Ryan, as well as his wife, Tammy Daybell. JJ and Tylee were found on his property, deceased. Tammy, who was laid to rest at first, was said to have died of natural causes. They re-exhumed her body, did some testing, did an autopsy, and decided that that was not the case of her death. That most likely, her death resulted from a murder. Chad Daybell is a self-proclaimed prophet, a man who believed in pre-mortal existence lives and also believed that the end times have approached and it was time to prepare for Jesus Christ's return. Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow also believed that both of them, being prophets, had the power to create portals and to take on the world of evil, demons, also referred to as zombies. These portals that we're referring to were used to travel, to communicate, and to cast, as well as reach the world through prayer. When the story first broke, they claimed that Lori Vallow was brainwashed by Chad Daybell. But we're starting to compare their background and their histories, find out that Chad's always been a teacher of light and dark. He's always been kind of strange, went outside the church doctrine, and he doesn't have a history of violence. Whereas Lori Vallow, on the other hand, has a long history of violence. Before we get started, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel to support us. You can hit the like button and also comment your thoughts. We're going to start off talking about Chad's life, who he was, what his interests were, and all those odd things that he talked about behind closed doors and with his family. Chad Daybell, while in high school, was working for a cemetery. He was a grave digger. He was a maintenance man. Most people find the cemetery not so inviting, but that's not the case with Chad Daybell. It seems that Chad Daybell found that the cemetery was one of the most comforting places for him, somewhere he really enjoyed to spend his time. Chad even wrote about his experience working as a grave digger and then later as a sexton. When Chad was older, was married and had a family, he had started a book publishing business with his wife, Tammy Daybell. But he found that those lives brought on stresses that he didn't desire. He found himself in a recession and going back to work for the cemetery. There, he says that was a relief for him.
Based on your background and experience with Chad, particularly that work background that you already talked about,
right?
Would it be safe to say, was Chad someone who was comfortable around death?
Oh, he would have to be. And yes, Chad wrote, he's an author. He's written books about death and dying as well. He's not squeamish about anything as far as being around a dead person. Although that must have been traumatic for him just to have his wife in that position. But yeah.
Thank you, sir. Your Honor, I don't have any more questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wixom.
That was a testimony of a fellow cemetery worker and associate/friend, suggesting that he might have been traumatized by Tammy's death. Chad Daybell, he desired to be a god. He had fantasy thoughts nearly 24/7 of his life. He desired to have these special gifts and powers. He also desired to be a leader within the LDS Church. He was fascinated by death, and you can hear here when his friends or associates say that he didn't seem to have any qualms about being around dead people. And we have learned that he just spent a lot of his time around the cemetery, and he seemed to enjoy that. Chad Daybell was quick to judge other people who claimed to have gifts. In fact, he believed that he would be able to call out the people who are fake, imposers or imposters. He's even claimed to nurture Julie Rove's powers. Chad Daybell was very close with Julie Rove. That is, up until 2018. Chad absolutely loved spending time with Julie, and that is fact. It was witnessed that he would even spend a lot of time looking at properties around his property, preparing for what was to come in the future, which would be basically a doomsday and time to build Zion. But there's something I want to share with you before we go any further. When Chad worked at the cemetery, he wrote his book about a very odd incident. I feel this is very important for you to understand who Chad is and the way that he thinks. So in this book, he wrote, "Ashes are gravel." Just so that you know, a lot of LDS people do not believe in cremation necessarily, yet Lori likes to cremate her people. That's basically, it seems to get rid of evidence. Chad Daybell, on the other hand, didn't seem to be a fan of cremation. He writes, "Some people choose to be cremated before having their ashes buried in the family plot. I don't mind since the size of the hole is much smaller. I can actually dig it by hand." All right, let's pause there. So when you're going to dig something like that, you're going to probably use a shovel or a small hand tool, not a huge tractor. I wanted to share that because John Pryor, Chad Daybell's defense, tried to make it seem as if Chad didn't use a shovel. All right, let's continue reading this. One misconception is that cremation is nothing but pure ashes, like the kind you would find in a fireplace. Actually, the cremation process isn't that pure. I found this fact the hard way. The first several cremations I buried had arrived in nice, solid boxes that weighed around 10 to 15 pounds. I would just put the box in the ground and fill in the hole. Then, one family dropped off the lady's cremated remains and requested that her ashes be placed in the same box as her deceased husband. The family members claimed that there would be plenty of room. They then went on their way, saying they'd be back in 2 hours. The reason Chad says that they come back is to do a little service. He says, "Well, I dug down and found the original box, and there was no way the second box would fit inside of this box. I knew the family would be back soon, and I wanted to honor their wishes, so I popped open the second box and pulled out the cremated remains, which were contained in a sturdy plastic bag." We're going to pause right there. Here, Chad kind of gives you a glimpse into how his mind works. He decides, since he has this excuse to open a grave, it is perfectly acceptable to use it as an excuse to rummage through disrespectfully through someone's loved one's remains. Let's continue. I couldn't help examining the contents. There were certainly were ashes, but there were also shards of bone and a few teeth. I guess they don't burn well. For me, I think this is important because of how he's thinking this out. It's very critical when you think about the future and what happened to Tylee Ryan on his property. Chad must have felt rushed to dispose of Tylee, allegedly, and found out that burning remains were not as easy as he believed it to be. This might explain why JJ was not treated that way. Burning remains would be a messy job. It would be difficult to hide all the evidence. While he must have thought at first that this was a perfect escape from murder. We'll continue reading what he wrote. I opened the first box and molded his wife's remains around the husband's plastic bag the best I could. I closed the lid. Couldn't help thinking that Resurrection Day is going to be complicated for those two. It could look like the game of Twister. So I felt, we're going to end it there. I felt like that was very important, what he shared there, as how he was thinking that when the resurrection comes and Jesus Christ returns and he calls out to his followers, the best people that live the best lives, and resurrects them from their graves. He's trying to imagine in deep physical detail how that could happen with two people, cremated remains that's been kind of mixed together. He's not disturbed by touching these remains, seeing these remains, or even the fact that they might have got mixed up a little bit. His main concerns are kind of morbid. So, number one, we noticed that Chad isn't as squeamish around remains or the cemetery as one might think. He's very curious about it. He wants to know everything he can. He wants to analyze it. The strangest part of it all for me is the fact that he fantasizes about it. He's all the time looking at the dead people, the mourners that come to visit the deceased. He fantasizes what they think, what they're doing, if there's ghosts. Remember the animals that show up on the cemetery property when someone's been laid to rest recently, or just hangs around for a certain amount of time around a certain place? Chad believes that they have some kind of cosmic connection. Anything happening around the cemetery, according to Chad, has something to do with the supernatural or someone from behind the veil. If you read Chad's books before he meets Julie Rove, they're not as crazy, I guess, as after he meets Julie Rove. So a lot of people are trying to figure out who is Julie Rove and how does she fit into this story. So Julie claimed to have a near-death experience. Chad located Julie on Aval, reached out to her, and offered to help her publish and write a book, in which he did. Julie then began to call herself a prophet. She also believed that the end times were approaching. She was getting these personal messages from the heaven and gods themselves, or even celestial beings. She refers to them. But here's the thing. Julie continued to reach out to doctrine and other teachings, supposedly not part of the LDS doctrine. So some of the things that she was seeking out was some of the new things coming out, like energy healing. And this is why you will hear that Chad and Lori called their group basically a healer group. And when you hear the terms vibration, strings, well, that's where it's coming from. In 2015, you had things like the blood moon that just basically said that Julie was right and that Chad was right, and other people like Christopher Parrott, Hector Sosa, other people like that believed that the end days were near, that just kind of give them the reassurance they needed to say, yeah, we believe that the end days are approaching. They're almost here. It's time to start building the Church of the Firstborn. It's time to prepare to build Zion, the city of light. Prepare for tent cities. Prepare for disaster and devastation. Most of these people were on a website called Aval, another voice of warning. It's a paid subscription for people who are like-minded, especially preppers. That's mostly preppers that were on that site. And they kind of had their own little thing like Facebook. Once you were on that site, you had your own little page to where you could promote your books or whatever. This is where many of these preppers and stuff made their connections. This is how this got so big, bigger than it should have. Chad began to actually adopt, I think it's a fair thing to say, a lot of Julie Rowe's understanding, teachings, and was actually starting to promote it. And then, as time went on, he started to promote it as his own ideas. If you listen to Julie Rowe's podcast, you got to remember that Lori Vallow was listening to Julie Rowe before she was actually listening to Chad. Julie Rowe had a podcast, and this is something Lori Vallow just loved. She lived by it. She pushed it. And you'll learn if you follow my Life Beyond the Grave series. There's some videos that are not so great audio-wise. I was struggling. I was sick and dealing with mic issues. I was just trying to get the series out because there's so much to it. But I will go into all those details that you haven't heard in court and trial. Anyway, it seemed that Julie Rowe was talking about dark spirits. And towards the end of her relationship with Chad, that topic became a little bit more popular. And you see, Julie Rowe and Chad Daybell will call each other to reassure each other's thoughts, which direction they should go when they are promoting end-day destruction, the coming of Christ, and building Zion. But as I would have to say about 2018, end of 2018, the beginning of 2019, it seemed the egos of Julie and Chad started kind of clashing. And it really started clashing after Chad Daybell met Lori Vallow. What we know about Lori Vallow, which will tell us about Chad, is that Lori Vallow has always been controlling. We know that Lori Vallow has been married multiple times. And each man that she had something to do with, she tried to change how they wore their clothes, how they styled their hair, how they exercise, the physique of their bodies. And big time, she liked to control their belief system, what they supported. That meant that they had to be Mormons. If you didn't do what Lori said, she would cut you off in a skinny minute. You would get punished. Lori is very, very controlling. Then you have Chad Daybell, who is also controlling. So how did these two make it? Considering Chad liked to control Tge Daybell. He used spirits, he used lies and manipulation to control Tge, what he wanted to do and how he wanted to go forward in the future. Tge wasn't allowed to have her own life. She wasn't allowed to play games. She loved playing Farmville or Frontierville, on Facebook. But Chad told her that her grandmother in spirit come to him and said that she needed to stop playing those games and to start working on the genealogy at the temple. Chad often heard voices from the heavens, from spirits, from entities, giving him guidance on what he should do in his future. This means his move to Rexburg was guided by spirits. Chad Daybell, without any thought, any type of emotion, toward Tge and the children away from their families to move to Rexburg for his own narrative agenda. He was a very manipulative man that was very, very selfish. No one mattered but Chad Daybell. And it doesn't show more than in trial as he is facing, the 3 murder charges and conspiracy and other charges. The fact that he allegedly helped plan the death of Tammy, might have even taken her life or helped. The fact of what he would put his kids through. He showed or has shown no remorse whatsoever, except for once, and it seemed like a planned emotional episode when they talked about Chad Daybell's wife, Tammy Daybell, in court. John Pryor, he should get an Oscar. I never understood why John Pryor feels so, like it's his job, but I couldn't do it. But my point is Chad Daybell so far, and I watch him very, very closely. He continues to carry this ego. And I noticed that he likes to imitate and copy the person he's next to, which means he's somewhat a follower. It appears that Chad believes that he's another attorney on this case, that he's not really Chad Daybell, the man being trialed, but the man defending this guy, Chad Daybell. We're going to talk more about the trial shortly. I just want to do a quick video on who Chad Daybell is, and we'll talk more about it. I want to share comments. I just haven't had time to get them up. As y'all know, time is like the least thing I have. But I'm going to prove to you, Chad Daybell is a manipulating liar. His part in this case is questionable. No one knows exactly what he did other than what's in text. His soft demeanor is throwing people off. And I think when Chris Watts, that case took off, that is what drove that case to be as crazy famous as it was, is the fact that Chris didn't seem to fit that title, murderer. And here you have another soft-spoken man with this innocent look to him on trial for murder. Many of you have been talking about the kids, especially Emma. And let me tell you, them kids have been raised in a way, it's going to take them a long time to wake up. I've heard a lot of comments on Emma. And the thing is, Emma is a lot like her father. But you got to remember who her parents are, especially her father, and the way that she was raised. And that was her environment. And will she be able to snap out of this? I think so. It's just going to take time. A lot of people believe that she has a lot of mental illness. I don't know. I think it's just these kids, the environment that they grew up in, it's going to take them time to learn and unlearn a lot of these things that they were raised with. You got to remember, we just seen texts where the whole family's saying that people are dark or light. It's going to be a huge mistake to put, in my opinion, Emma on a stand. That would be a huge mistake. She is one of the least liked of the children. A lot of people think that's cruel, and where is that coming from? Well, it would have been for people following this case really close. She was sticking her tongue out, acting really immature, kind of hateful, and that was their first experience knowing Emma. Another reason is the fact that just recently a lot of people are talking about what Emma looks like today. She seems to be imitating her stepmother, Lori Vallow. I am not certain why Emma colored her hair like this, but it could be for other reasons. Maybe she doesn't want to be recognized. So I wanted to share, the latest on that and let you guys know that, with the Daybell kids, I really don't know what to think at this time. Share your ideas and thoughts on who you think Chad Daybell is. We'll go into more detail on this later. There's some information I wanted to share. I just didn't have time to get to today. Don't forget about these girls that are missing. Share one of their stories on your social media today. Love you guys. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and like, because Google and all this is kind of shutting us private people down. They don't want us to get out there. So I would really appreciate the help. Love you guys. See you soon.